transitioning us in such wonderful ways rather than ringing bells or yelling at you all or something. So we appreciate that. I want to just let you know how we're going to proceed today. Final day for mental health here for this particular program for mental health. Not the final day, we're going to talk about it. I'll get to that at the end. So here's what we're going to do. You all have asked questions in advance. So we're trying to honor that. So we're going to spend the first 25 to 30-ish minutes addressing those questions. I've passed those on to Tom this week. I wrote those down word for word. Thank you for writing legibly. And pass them on to Tom. So here's the thing. It is sometimes hard to know how to decipher a question when you're just being given something written. So here's what I want to ask you. If you feel comfortable and you are the person who asked this question, after Tom answers it, I'm going to read the questions, Tom will answer it, and then I'll kind of give a minute to, after he answers it, to see if there's any follow-up. If you ask the question and you actually intended him to answer something else, and you are so bold enough to clarify that, would you please do that? I've got a roaming mic, I can run to you, just kind of put your hand up, and we want your questions to be honored and addressed. It's just, and he's doing the best he can, it's just sometimes hard to know from something written. So please know that you'll have that opportunity. If you don't want to clarify, we'll just move on. We're leaving about 10-ish minutes at the end, we'll see, to ask just questions now that you think of. If you have things that come to you now or you wish you'd written or something he says today sparks a different question, I'd love for you at the end. I've got a mic, I'll walk to you, we'll just have you go for it then. And then at the end, I'm just going to close with a couple of announcements about where we're going from here. So with that, where's my, the first question, come on up, Tom. In many evangelical churches, there is a reticence to embrace emotions and even at times a suspicion of emotions and the role of emotions. How is a Christian to think about emotions in general? Are some positive, i.e. happiness, and some negative, like anger and sadness?
All right.
Go for it.
Let's start with the reality that the emotional mind is about 4 years old. That's when it's done developing. So when it's generating a response, it is a child's response to what's taking place. And certainly we embrace happiness, joy, contentment, and peace, and that's what we like to feel, but we don't really like anger or anxiety or sadness. Well, mostly we don't like anger, anxiety, and sadness, especially anxiety and sadness. Anger we sort of like because we feel powerful when it comes, and we have a certainty about what's going on, and we know we're right when we feel those things. And that becomes a little bit problematic. But I want you to start thinking of emotions as they reflect our assessment of a situation, and if we will treat the emotion as sort of an assessment, where I'm going to try to guide you is that you let those trigger exploration of what you would prefer, how you might obtain whatever that is, and because there's a reality, if these emotions don't arise inside of us, we're missing things that are taking place. So think of emotions as a little bit like a radar system. It picks up, it tells us this is important, pay attention to it. So I want you to start thinking that way. We'll get more into that as we go along. We often don't like, especially the angry emotions or the negative emotions in others, because they create a problem to solve and even a threat to us when we do it. I encourage clients to think of emotions as being a little bit like weather. We like sunny, warm, and clear, and we tend not to like cloudy and stormy. But in fact, we accept these realities in Minnesota. We even carry a sense of pride in our ability to engage and manage these things, and we see others as being a little weak because they don't manage it as well as we do. And I think we have to hold on to that a lot here. And there are benefits to many types of weather, but some are dangerous. That's all there. We learn to cope and appreciate the benefits while dealing with the problems. So with emotions, what I like to say is we need to become true Minnesotans. And I use the following words: acknowledge, examine, and choose. And these words direct that we not simply let the emotion direct us, but we do see the reality, we determine how to engage them effectively, and by examining them, we can attempt to determine the meaning, the focus, and therefore the options available to us. And that requires that we use then the rational mind. We're not letting that emotional 4-year-old drive us and guide us, but we turn to our rational mind, the part that's not done developing until 28 years of age, to take over with that. And I suppose it could theoretically be possible to rationally engage every situation without emotion, but if we lost this emotion, we would also lose joy and peace. Now, with regard to anger specifically, Christians are nervous about feeling angry because we want to be people of love and not cultivate anger in our lives. And so the question is, what's the danger of Christians not recognizing or invalidating or denying their anger? And what's the proper way to handle anger? And start by examining what anger is. At its core, anger is simply a statement that I don't like it, and I feel strongly about how much I don't like it. And I believe it's fine to not like or to disagree with something. We particularly see this in moral, ethical, and even spiritual parts of our lives, and at best we hold to and defend what we believe to be the truth. We see someone hurting or damaging something or someone else, and we want to intercede. That's what anger tells us, to do that. And I believe in many situations, but not all, we are even called to intervene for spiritual, moral, or even ethical issues. So if we simply define anger as a strong sense of concern, then we want to be constructive in expressing that concern instead of destructive in expressing that concern. The problem comes when we allow anger to move us toward destructive action and interventions. We don't like that in others, and it's really a problem for us. This could include attacking verbally, physically, cutting off somebody else. In fact, I've been on church boards and committees where members would attempt to solve problems by dismissing or getting angry at other positions rather than stopping and saying, I don't like this, can we explore it? Let's make sense out of this. Because when we feel strongly, we are certain we are right. I'm going to say that again. When we feel it strongly, we know we're right because we feel it so strongly. That's kind of a problem. We have to stop and remember that it's a 4-year-old that's driving that energy inside of us. So I believe we're called to acknowledge our own intensity, redirect ourselves to explore what the other is pursuing, and work to find agreement. And this requires an examination of our disagreement. If we do this, we open the possibility of finding better solutions. So we have to be humble about that. We have to be open and express that very carefully. I see this in adults, and I see it in parenting. And I recall with joy, actually, working with my daughters when they were struggling to help guide them into learning how to examine that and think about that and do something constructive with what they were feeling. And all of this, feeling anger is not the problem, but expressing it constructively is essential. I'm going to say it again. It's not a problem to feel anger. That's built into us. The problem becomes in what do you do with it? How do you express it? How do you make something positive come out of it? It's been present in my marriage, raising my kids, running a business, serving on committees, and having friendships. It's going to be a part of your life. Be ready for it. If I can engage it constructively, better things happen. When you become depressed, and by any questions on the anger stuff right now, because I want to touch all 3 major emotions here. All right. When you become depressed, you may feel sad or hopeless, lose interest and pleasure in most activities, and when your mood shifts to mania or hypomania, that can be a part of depression. You might feel euphoric, full of energy, or unusually irritable. These mood swings can affect sleep, energy, activity, judgment, behavior, and the ability to think. Depression then often causes withdrawal from others and distrust of your own solutions. Depression elements can lead to some efforts at understanding the meaning and purpose even in your whole life, but when full-blown depression, the discouragement deeply interferes with positive functioning. It is a problem. Depression just shuts people down, and it doesn't tend to generate a positive movement, so you have to choose to engage that as we go. I'm going to try to finish these, and then we'll see what we can talk about here. Anxiety certainly has elements of agitation and uncertainty, which can lead to insecurity and fear. When I stated that everyone has one of these issues as a primary element, mine's anxiety. Think in yourself, anger, depression, anxiety, probably one of those is more typical for you than the other ones. Anxiety is my major one. Anger virtually is never an issue for me. I just have never been an angry person at all. Maybe a little bit of depression at times, not much. Anxiety has these elements of insecurity and uncertainty and distrust of the self, and seeks avoidance and hopes someone will provide an answer, so there's essential distrust of the self. When depression and anxiety are intense and continuous, medications are often prescribed and can be very useful, although I still prefer clarity and understanding over medication where I can. So I've learned to use quieting meditation and journaling to get the blow of the meaning for me. And out of this, generally try to find a path to address the trigger for anxiety and constructive response to it. So I think next question is, what's your next question here? Okay.
Want to follow up with one of those? Otherwise, I have a little resource I want to share. My counselor recently made me aware of this amazing book, Permission to Feel. It is from the Yale Center for the director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, professor of the Yale Child Study Center. But the subtitle is Permission to Feel, Unlocking the Power of Emotions to Help Our Kids, Ourselves, and Our Society Thrive. What I want to say about this book, if you're a reader, is not only does the guy have chops, obviously, but it's not an academic, it's not hard to understand, it's really readable. And he says what you're saying in terms of acknowledge, examine, choose. And he uses the ruler method, which he expounds on, recognize emotions, understand emotions, label the emotion, because half our problem is we don't have enough words and language for it to be specific, expressing emotion in appropriate, constructive ways, and then regulating. So it is fantastic. What I love about this is the contribution this makes. I thought of our educators, some of you, because I often think about how this applies to us personally. This is amazing in terms of how this would impact schools, kids, teachers, and if we could teach, if we prioritized emotional health and emotional intelligence in our schools, and I see the educator nodding her head at me, as much as we were serious about teaching math, how that would revolutionize our society and our relationships, our kids, ourselves. So anyways, it's a resource. It's a little dangerous to recommend a book I'm not finished with yet, but I'm trusting you to sift what may not be appropriate. But understanding to say it another way that Tom is saying it, we are whole people made in the image of a God who embraces all of that. And when you look at Jesus and watching him in the Gospels, he is not stoic. He's got emotion. He's got anger. He's got grief and sadness and compassion and joy and hope and devotion and steadfastness and perseverance. And he's got all kinds of things. So, I just want to make sure I don't know fully where the question was, but I want to make sure in our theology that we are leaving room for that. Not just because we're broken human beings, but because we're made in the image of a God who himself has emotion. And he's not ruled by it. He is in charge of his emotions, but he is moved by compassion. He's moved by splankta, in the Gospels. So emotions are not bad. Permission to feel. And, sometimes when I'm interacting with people or after the worship service, they're like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm crying. And I'm like, no, we're putting Kleenex in every pews of this church. If you can't cry in church, I don't know where you can cry. And we're doing something wrong if you can't cry in this church. So I've said it. You have permission to feel. What you do with it, how you explore it, there's a lot to unpack there. And I love that weather analogy. We can't control the weather. We can sure choose what we do with the weather we're given and how our attitude is with that. And the weather changes and emotions change. They are in motion, right? They're moving through us. So anything else that needs to be said, I'm looking for those who want to come back to that. Otherwise, we'll press on to our next third one, which is related. Okay, I'm going to let Tom press on. Thank you, Tom.
Until 28. Does a long-term history of mental health struggles, challenges slow that down or keep someone from integrating the rational with the emotional? And briefly, the answer is yes. That's sort of what happens. In reality, the brain will have essentially completed development into adulthood, but the skills and capacity of operating as an adult are likely to be hindered or ineffective if you haven't really learned how to do that well. It doesn't mean that such a person cannot learn and understand adult concepts, but whether it's confusion or disturbance of learning abilities, they don't have the internal skills to manage elements of life effectively. We sometimes describe a person in terms of age level of functioning, although that's not clearly defined. This is especially true where there's a limit on rational processing, but also true when emotional processing is very limited. Such situations may lead to the need for supervised care in a facility, depending on the level of cognitive ability. And they are more operating at a younger stage than at an adult level. Sadly, there are independent adults who function at this lower level, but it is difficult to have them be open to intervention with that. So if that process of developing that full cognitive ability isn't really managed well because of interference from emotional, even other kinds of things that have happened, such people are always a little bit more limited. We want to support them, encourage them, help them the way we can, but there are limits that can be there if they don't reach that high level of functioning. So, yeah.
Should we follow up on that at all? That was, I think, a question from week 1, so you might not even remember if you follow up, or do you want him to press on? Looking. Opportunity. Okay, we'll press on because obviously at the end you'll have some time. This is an interesting one that you're going to have to tease out. Number 4, can you speak more about ADD, ADHD versus bipolar disorder?
Yeah. When we look at it, ADD, ADHD, attention disorder type things, and hyperactive attention disorder are more of a cognitive problem than an emotional problem. But it will virtually always trigger emotional responses to the person experiencing these things, depending on the level of impact, the level of intensity of that ADD that's there. In this disorder, the child or the person finds their focus shifting just in and of itself, and it can be hard for them to continue to track a task, to see what they're doing, because their mind moves them around to different things. It virtually always expresses itself early in childhood if it's going to be a part of a person's life, and to the consternation of parents and teachers alike. And depending on the level of the disorder, the child may not be able to focus on any task in a meaningful way, or the child may have some distraction from completing tasks, but if encouraged, can ultimately complete what is going on most of the time. And some become compulsively engaged in an action. That's another version of ADD, so compulsively engaged in the action that it destroys any real accomplishment. A lot of parents of ADD kids are just amazed. They cannot handle small tasks, but they get into a computer game and they can be there for hours and not lose any attention at all. So there can be a compulsive side of this as well as just the distractibility side of it. Medication can help with this, although many resist this as they want to be in control of themselves. I think more than almost any disorder for adults, they just don't like being on the medication. It doesn't feel like themselves. They want to feel like they're in charge of their mind, even if they're not totally in charge of their mind. I have some ADD, although it was apparently not a focus of the teachers when I was that age, but my teachers would often tell my parents that I would always finish my work, but I'd spend a lot of time just looking out the window, just kind of doing something. I was in some different land, oftentimes, and yet my work got done, And it was acknowledged that I could accomplish everything I had to do, but they just see me off somewhere, and that's still true to me to some degree. I can be trying to focus, and all of a sudden I'm over here. I like looking at the bright silvery things that are in my life. I've learned to basically focus. Obviously, I've gotten through school and have carried on a successful career, but it's something that I'm aware of happening inside of me. I will say I'm glad I was functional enough that more intervention was not necessary, and glad for that. Bipolar disorder is more of a mood disorder with impact on accomplishing tasks. It has episodes of mood swings which may occur rarely or multiple times in a year. While most people will experience some emotional movement between episodes, some may not experience any. And although bipolar disorder is a lifelong condition, you can manage your mood swings and other symptoms by following a treatment plan. In most cases, bipolar disorder is treated with medications and psychological counseling. It certainly can have sort of an appearance of ADD at times, but it has a really different cause, and each can lead to avoidance or obsessive engagement. So the bipolar person, when they get into a manic mood, they can just be racing off and doing all kinds of things. The ADD person can be racing off and doing things. The bipolar, it's almost like it takes over and they almost can't not do it. ADD sort of knows there's some choice, but they can be absorbed in it. They can look alike, but the ADD is again, much more of a cognitive type thing, and the bipolar is much more deeply an emotional thing, even if they have some of the same appearance in them.
Follow up on that. There's a lot there. It's hard to address these big issues in the short amount of time, but I want to provide space if ADD, ADHD is a lot where, Oh, well, you know what? We're recording these, so others will appreciate that. Yeah, thanks.
Advice for people on the other side of the ADD person.
Yeah. It can be rather frustrating, especially if it's a parent on the other side of the ADD issue.
That's great.
Because you can feel helpless. You try everything you can to get some impact, to get some change, to get some control, and it just keeps slipping out of your hands. And because ADD, especially in kids, adolescents, it, depending on the intensity of it, can be so overwhelming, can so define everything. For a parent, it's just like it's out of you can't get them to study, you can't get them to finish things, you can't get them to focus, you can't get them to clean their room, you feel helpless with that. In some situations, there can be some sort of natural and logical consequences you might use to say, you got to accomplish this, or else this doesn't happen, or this does happen, whatever it might be. I like those natural and logical consequences. ADD kids can just be totally, they just ignore it. Their minds just take over and control them. Some, I think, really wish they could, and they just can't stop themselves from moving to this other stuff. And so for a parent, I think you're stuck with having to have a lot of compassion, and I'd rather have you approach it with compassion than with anger, but the anger almost never has any impact, maybe temporary, but if the child doesn't have control of it, the child doesn't have control of it, is my sense of it all. That's where the medication can be very helpful. If the child resists the medication, sometimes it's really hard to make anything happen for that child. So again, you might set up some structures, some consequences. Maybe you start to teach them and they get a sense of they can choose about this. And frankly, for some, it's like they never learned that. And that frustration as a parent is very difficult and aggravating. Hard to be compassionate at that point in time. When it's so obvious to you, if you just sat down and did it, you could finish it. And they can't make themselves do it. Some can. And, fortunately for me, mine was mild enough. I'm not sure. I think they saw this sort of distractibility and not quite focused, and yet I could focus enough and get the work done, and I cared about it, so it wasn't an issue for me. But when it's very intense, I think you feel pretty helpless as a parent to do much with that.
I was more concerned about adult me.
Yeah.
You mentioned I had this, maybe not mild, undiagnosable, wasn't a problem happening in graduate school, but I still suffer with it. And now, the organization part is getting harder. Are you feeling that versus faith and frustration sometimes?
I won't say it's feeling harder, but it certainly can be an issue for me. I'm aware of it, and so I take that into account. As I'm planning for activities, I know somewhere I'm likely to get some distraction and move away from it. By reminding myself of that, sometimes that helps me to, no, I'm going to stay on track. And again, mine's pretty mild, but it's there. So I have planned into my life when I have a project to complete, how I will do it, but I include in there almost space for getting distracted and then getting myself back in. Because I will never be the person that starts a project, even like preparing this. I didn't even plan that I would just sit down and in 2 hours finish this presentation. That wasn't going to happen. So I write a quick outline, left it, and then came back, and then I put some pieces in and started putting it, left it, and came back later and did it. And, it works out. But I make sure I include in when I have an assignment, something to do, and it's not always the case. At times, there's an assignment, it's got to get done. Well, it's actually nice. If it has to get done in the next hour, boom, I can just dive in and finish it. But where there's a time frame, I just kind of plan on doing it in pieces, so I will do it, and that's how I take care of it. But it can, at times, disrupt. It probably is more of an issue for my wife than anybody else. One of the times we were moving, and I was sweeping the floor, and then I was working upstairs, and she came up and she said, "Why are you up here?" I said, "Well, we have to get this done." She said, "Yeah, but you haven't finished sweeping the floor yet." "Oh, really?" I didn't even know I had just left it half done, and I'd gone upstairs for something else. That was the nature. That's what happens to me at times. She's learned to work with me. It's really nice. But I'm aware of it, she's aware of it, and we just kind of, if I have to be redirected, I get redirected by myself, by her, whatever, and I give myself the time to do it. So that's kind of how I deal with it. Make sense? Okay.
I appreciate your question there. And a couple of the next few are going to border on this. How do we help others? So I'm going to push us on to what are some approaches to talk to teenagers about their unspoken mental health issues, especially boys?
Yeah, this is a challenging issue. With each of I had 2 daughters. With each of my daughters, there were times of struggling, them managing elements of their lives. At times, it was clear they were reacting to relationship experiences with their friends. Other times, it was clear they were struggling because of internal issues. And we had both of them in counseling along the way. Although these episodes are fairly brief and seem to get some pretty good results. And I'm quite proud of this, but both my daughters are also pretty smart. They make good things happen. They both have their doctorates. They both have good, really successful careers, very successful marriages, so they can do it. But we believe that because we made sure they took care of some of those issues early on, that was good. And by the way, as a therapist, I can't be the therapist to my own children. So we got somebody else involved. Not that I couldn't participate, but we had somebody else do it because they were more likely to listen, and they did. They paid attention to what that was. It's often difficult to know as a parent whether your teenager is just experiencing normal ups and downs in life, friendships changing, slights on being on the sports team, etc., or whether they are really being impacted very negatively. Is there something is it situational and they have to deal with it? Is there something deeper going on inside that we better attend to? So it can be a challenge to determine if counseling is necessary. We could see that our efforts were not bringing about the change, And we could see it interfering enough in their lives, so determined that it was better to send them to counseling than to keep on trying to do what we were doing, which wasn't making a difference for the different experiences that they had. But there was much time we could see that we were having some positive impact, and so we didn't always pursue that. We did what we could do too. So we need to talk with them. We need to have the conversations. And that ability to have conversations really starts early in life. It doesn't start when they're adolescents. It starts when they are younger and they're willing to talk. And that talking is just exploring, stepping into what they're doing in their lives, what they're playing with, what they're enjoying, what they like, what they're thinking about, what they picture for the future. I mean, I'm quite amazed. My one daughter, in 2nd and 3rd grade, she and I would watch surgeries on TV. By that point in time, she wanted to be a medical doctor. 3rd, 4th grade, she knew she wanted to be a medical doctor. I didn't have any kind of clear thoughts like that at that point in time. And she pursued it. She chose to become a PA instead of a medical doctor because she talked to some physicians, and they just said, if you want to have a family, don't be a medical doctor, be a PA. So she went that way. And she's very successful in what she's doing with that. So we talked, we explored, we tried to understand, we showed options, we had them think. That whole thing, we tried to start early, and we kept it going. And so during adolescence, it's not that they didn't resist, push back, sneak, do some stuff like that. I never do that, just by the way, just so you know, okay? It's not like that doesn't happen. But there was a connection that we had built, and they responded to that as we went along. So, I mean, if they're just adolescents now, then it's harder to start that, actually. So I just encourage all parents, especially younger parents, be active, be a part of their life. So talk with them, explore. More than concluding what the answer should be, explore and help them look at options and figure out how to think about things. Be doing that. Counseling may be important. Having an outsider connect to their struggles can be meaningful, as it was with my daughters, and helping them to feel a little bit more like they are in charge. So the question becomes, how effective is therapy for a teen who is not interested or does not like going to counseling or therapy? How do you force that? Each person, whether an adult or a teen, may or may not respond to counseling immediately. At times, it's because of their resistance to really engaging it. Other times, the client is certain that they are correct, so they will not listen to counseling. And at times, the match with the counselor is just not a good match. If I'm working with a teen or an adult who does not seem to be responding, I'll work for a while, but if they're not responding to me, I'll help them find a different therapist to see if we can get somebody else, because somebody else may connect to them in a way I can't. I do not even start to pretend that everybody that walks into my door, that we're going to be a good match. I don't pretend that at all. So I'm proactive as a therapist to make sure that they get with somebody that could be better here. There's no silver bullets. I mean, we don't get to just know what the outcome's going to be. We can't dictate the outcome. They're not silver bullets, so we continue to work, have the teen be in counseling if possible, continue our own conversations with them. And some teens, they find their identity through resistance. And they will continue to find their identity through resistance and independence. And now, if they become good at it enough, that can actually turn into a very forceful, positive force in society for us, because they just make sure they push themselves to be what they're going to be, and then they grab onto something and they run with it. For others, if they are constantly resisting, doing their own way, they may do that to a deeper level and really not be constructive, and there can be real problems. I wish we had a silver bullet here. There's not a silver bullet. I wish we could just make sure everybody grew up the way we wished. We're not going to be able to do that. So
I'm going to push us on. He addressed 5 and 6 there, which was great. This is a long question, and some of this was addressed last week, Tom, when Rich spoke about how we as a church can care. So you may not want to add a lot. We just got this and then one other question about conspiracy theories, and then I want to open it up. So we'll be as brief as we can. Question 7, mental health seems to be the last frontier of acceptable realms of struggles for believers. The church now acknowledges the reality of addiction, divorce, sexual sin, for example, but it seems slow to embrace support for believers with significant psychological and psychiatric diagnoses like schizophrenia, dissociative identity disorder, or paralyzing depression. The church has a long history of demonizing those significant struggles instead. While demonic influences are real, things like ritual abuse are real contributors to disorders, so are genetic inheritance, trauma, and chemical imbalance. What can we as believers do to help sufferers feel safe among us? How can we better support each other when we or family members are struggling with significant diagnoses?
Yeah, I really like that question a lot, and it's true. Again, many more churches, many pastors are recognizing the solution is not just this spiritual solution and God's going to heal everything and it's going to be fine. That's, I would say, more the understanding than the other understanding that we resist any mental health coverage. I will say, in my experience as a clinician, I find many pastors are eager to utilize mental health services. Our own clinic has offered training for pastors for a good number of years, and it's always filled with pastors who are coming in, wanting to understand what's going on, eager to learn, eager to grow. So I see a whole lot of openness among pastors for this kind of involvement. I know there are some who resist this and speak spiritual answers for everything. I don't know these pastors as they don't communicate with me, and so it's hard for me to say exactly what to do when you have that situation. I know certainly right now today with Rich, you don't have that issue at all. But there are some who resist it. I'm certain this is not happening here, and so if you're struggling, I know you will find support here. Where demonization is happening, there's not a simple answer, other than if there's a relationship with such a pastor, ongoing communication may facilitate change, and it may not. I've worked with some pastors who were required by leadership to go to counseling, and with some of them, I've had very little impact. They just weren't open to it. I know at least 2 who lost their positions, so the congregation stood strong when that's what they were facing, and that strength needs to be there. It can be a challenge to step into someone's life who has severe issues, and they may appreciate but then want to hold on to you. Oh, there's another part of this whole thing, what to do with those strong issues. If somebody steps into your life who does have very severe issues, and you are open to them and want to help them, I've seen it happen where they just grab on and hold on and need you to be there for them and take care of them. That happened a little bit for my wife at one point in time, a woman who had many issues, and she was just compassionate and tried to help. And all of a sudden, she was present and would just come over and be there and want attention and want answers and want to be fixed. I even intervened and tried to get her into counseling, and we got some counseling, and it continued on. And finally, my wife and I set up a boundary and said to her, here's the limits. Here's what will happen. And if you just show up at our door, we are not going to open the door to you. We'll acknowledge that you're there. We will not open our door to you at that point in time. We can't continue to do this, because she wanted to really almost move in with us, it felt like. And that wasn't going to happen for us. So we want to support, we want to encourage. Using professional resources is, in my opinion, the best way to go. To step alongside is great, and then be very aware of the boundaries you need to maintain as you do that. Some people are great. They really want just a little, they want somebody to talk to at times, and that little bit of connection or that meaningful connection really helps them figure out to go to the next place. That's wonderful. Be ready to take care of yourself And if you are able to step into those lives, great. That's a useful thing. But I encourage you to set boundaries when you need to set boundaries. So.
And here I want to put an exclamation point on the role of the community, because none of us sees ourselves accurately. And I have been helped at times in my life where somebody says, hey, you're spending a lot of time with that college student. Like, she's kind of taking you down. What's going on? You're skipping soccer, you're skipping, we need other people around us to say, hey, I noticed there's a lot, give eyes on that and give feedback. So don't do it alone. Don't try to assess, am I being compassionate or do I not have boundaries by yourself? That's not a wise thing to do. Include those who know you best and you trust and respect in that conversation. Last question, then I want to open it up for any here. My daughter is into conspiracy theories, flat earth, deep state. Is there hope for her if she's unwilling to be open to a new truth? Can counseling help her?
Well, great question, and boy, that seems to be more present today than it's been in past years. It's been I think our political world in the last few years has generated a lot of this, and I don't have any easy answers for this. I have a brother who views many elements of life with an entirely different, very spiritual picture of things, a very different picture of how the spiritual world engages with this. I don't see it working well for him, but he's not open at this point to other options. That is where he lives. He gave me all kinds of prophecies that we have current day prophets apparently, and they go online to do their prophesying. And he was living by these prophecies. Not a single one of them came true. But he continues to listen to the prophets, believing that's where the truth is going to come to him. The guy's smart. He's got his doctorate. He's worked very well in his careers. He's now retired, and we can hardly talk. I wish we could, but I don't know how to break into it. I have determined to continue to communicate and listen along with questions about my confusion about where he stands, but these conversations aren't bringing change. I actually am impressed with those who can hold deeply to their perspectives in the face of challenge. They are essentially strong people. Now, that word strong has some interesting issues. Is it rigid strong? Is it a strength that is not open to considering another perspective? And yet I know what I believe, and other things come along, I will entertain them, but if I don't believe them, I don't go with them. And so my brother believes that I've been sort of deluded by some things. I don't think I am, but of course we all know that we're right, and that's kind of fun. So with him, I literally am praying for enlightenment, and that's with the sense that I'm not likely to have a deep impact on him. It was interesting, he sent me an email recently, or a text recently, about something he wanted to share with the other brothers. And I'm the only brother that really even talks with him, and I just said, well, certainly you have, and you could, and you understand if you send that text, you will be further alienated from them than you already are. And he responded back, he said, yep, you're right. So he didn't. So there's a little bit of influence there, but not a lot. And it's certainly hard to watch a child seem to be swallowed up into this. And you're seeing them use their strengths. Anybody that gets sort of really rigidly connected to something, there's a certain kind of strength in that. There's a certain kind of commitment. We want to see commitment in people. I want to see somebody really own what they believe and live according to what they believe. So at some level, when they get into this, they're demonstrating a form of strength. It's just, I think this is a strength that is burying them, that is hurting them. I really don't have any good solution for how you get in and have somebody that's just so certain of what they believe, how you're going to get in and change that mind. I've been unsuccessful at it. I don't know how to tell you to do it. We're left at that point with prayer, and I trust prayer at some level, and I also know that my prayers sometimes aren't answered the way I wish they were answered. And so I think we're left we almost have to put them into the hands of God and trust God to work. And in a funny sort of way, I also am praying for myself that my mind stays clear, because I can have certainty. I want to be open, and so my wife and I are careful. We listen to different perspectives. We will observe different stations that say different things to make sure we're not just as rigid as somebody who I think is really in trouble. So I try to listen to the stuff, and then I'm deciding what I trust. And the good news is I'm right, just so you know.
We've got time for maybe just one question. So if it is burning within you and you've had it from the beginning, Tim is going to come to you. And that's why Tim has the mic, because he can decide between Den and Marie, not me.
Hi, eating disorders.
Yes.
Its prevalence, male, female, help, especially at middle school, high school level, things that are helpful, things that are not helpful, with people that you know with eating disorders.
And can only speak to that moderately. I don't do any work with eating disorders myself. When I see an eating disorder, I refer it on. There are programs here in the cities from several hospital settings that will work with eating disorders. And I've had clients that have been through those programs, and it's been very helpful to them. And I've seen clients, they aren't coming for an eating disorder, but had gone through it and felt like it didn't help them at all. That's true with any therapy. I've had clients that have found me to be wonderful, and other clients that have looked for something else because I wasn't helping them. My sense is it tends to be more with females. I believe that's what the research shows us, and yet there are enough males, young males, I've had some of them referred to me, and I've referred them on, but young males who, yeah, they've gotten stuck with eating disorders, but I'm really confident it's much more of a female issue in adolescence than it's a male issue. I think that the outcome of the treatment is mixed. I've worked with some older adults who went through it, and they sort of manage it, but weren't sure it ever helped them to go through the treatment. And so it's kind of a gnarly problem to get in and break. There's so much about identity built into an eating disorder, emotional vulnerability built into an eating disorder, the reality that it's such an easy thing to do if you want to use this because it helps you to feel better or gives you hope that you're going to make yourself better. So it's a very challenging thing to interact with, to intervene with, and to change. So that's my best answer, unless you want to follow up any more with your question here.
I'm going to jump to that because I do want to dismiss us here, and then Tom will stay. If you didn't get a chance to ask your question, you can ask for a couple minutes, but I'm going to jump to where we're going from here. And the first thing I was going to say, there's one thing that may happen. There's another that for sure is happening. The one thing that may happen, that I hope it's just a matter of resources, both in securing somebody, but then also timing of staff. One of the things we may try to do that I've long wanted to do is to resource parents of our students. So whether it's a student parent group or just parents, have a counselor come talk about anxiety, depression, eating disorders with adolescents specifically. Because I think that would be a huge boost to us this spring. That's the one I don't know if it will make the priority list, but I'm jumping in on that now because it needs to happen at some point. Let me pause there, and can we first thank Tom not only for his trying to address questions this week in a short amount of time, and also his 3 weeks with us. Thanks to those who were vulnerable and brave enough asking questions. It's hard to put it out there. I appreciate that. Last announcement I want to make is where we're going from here for sure, not unknown, and that is one of the ideas that's come up in the midst of this actually was week 2 in a conversation with Sarah via the Holy Spirit, and exclamation point last week in our time with Rich about what can the church do. We're going to just pilot. I don't know where it's going to go. I don't have certainty. Sorry, but February through May, we're going to pilot this group, a support group for caregivers, those who are caregiving for someone dealing with mental illness and severe mental health issues. So whether that's a spouse or a parent or a child or whatever the realm is, we want to try to provide some support to you. We'll see how it goes, and if you want to continue it, we'll continue it, but we're not going to force something that now stays forever if it's not helpful. We're thinking this will be once a month. We would like it to be people here at City Church because this is new and we kind of want to make mistakes, guinea pigs, let you be the guinea pigs rather than open this up to the community when we don't know what we're doing. So we're going to start small. But if you know of someone who would greatly benefit from this, I have a neighbor who would greatly benefit from this. I want to encourage you to invite that person. So we're not posting it on our website, but if somebody at City Church knows someone who could benefit, please come. The curriculum will be light. There will be some curriculum, so there's some focus and direction to the conversation, and it isn't just sort of people sharing all of this hard stuff. We're still working on that piece, but what I want you to see is the two people who are going to be spearheading this, which I'm so excited for, Cheryl Heathcote, Sarah Ronayne. Would you guys stand up, actually, just so people can put faces to names? This is Cheryl Heathcote, worked 14 years in mental health resources, wonderful. And we were talking this week, it may actually be her niche that the Lord has now opened up timing-wise because she's not working. Sarah Ronayne has a deep passion for this, as you know, Sarah. And so they're going to be a wonderful tag team. They're going to stay after. If you have questions, please talk to them directly so you don't have to go through me or send me an email that goes to my trash that I don't get, and then you don't get connected. Please just go to them directly because we want you to connect, and they will be lovely. So there will be more information about that in the newsletter. So if you're not on our newsletter list, you should really write your email legibly on that white connection card so I can add you to the list so you can be a part of it and invited. Because again, if it's not legible, I can't help you, and I want to help you. Okay, anything else? I think I need to pray and release you all, and then stay if you want to stay. I'm going to run to my office right after this and grab the mental health resource guide, which we printed off, and I want some of you to take them so my work was not in vain. It's a really great resource. The link is on our website or in the newsletter, but it's also really helpful to have. So I'm going to bring those. I didn't have time in between. Lord, we thank you that you have created all things. We are deeply loved by you, and you get it because you have walked in our shoes. You have walked on this broken earth, and you have seen the pain, and you have done something about it. And so we give you thanks, and we pray now that we would be a community that more closely looks like you in the ways we heal and care and tend to and are compassionate towards, and also are resolute and firm and boundaried and structured and focused on what you have for us, what your will is for us. We have a hard time knowing the difference most of that time. So we thank you, Holy Spirit, that you have come as the guide and the comforter and the healer. We ask you to help us individually and in our corporate life be people who more model and live like your Son, Jesus, of truth and grace. May it be so for our sake, because it is a great joy to walk in your way, but for your glory and for people to come to a knowledge of your love and goodness and your kingdom more here on earth as it is in heaven. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. You're free to go. Oh, bless you, Robin Kirscher, for running to the office for me. Mental health resource if you want. Cheryl and Sarah.